Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Anthony Kazenza with CincyJungle.com and the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. You are now listening to, if you're joining us live, you are listening to the latest episode of the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'll be joined shortly by my co-host Scott Schultze. Hopefully, he had a family engagement, and hopefully we can get him on board and back in the saddle here. Thanks for dealing with the holiday schedule. We took a week off. I was a little under the weather personally throughout the holiday weekend, and now Thanksgiving and people are traveling, all that kind of stuff. So we just decided to take a week off, but we had to come back, and we had to come back strong for Steelers Week because that is what's up now. And really, since the last show. The Bengals have now been on a 2-game win streak. They've won a couple of games. They're now really in the mix at 5-6. They don't currently sit in a seeded spot, but they are right behind the Buffalo Bills, who they beat earlier this year. So that's kind of a big deal. We'll be taking some questions at the end of the show. Again, it's Anthony Kazenza. I'm going to be hopefully joined by Scott Schultze later in the program. We're going to be talking about the wins. We're going to be talking about the Steelers game. We're going to be talking about a lot of different things tonight. So appreciate you tuning in. And like I said, I know we had a little bit of a schedule issue last week, but I appreciate you dealing with that and hanging with us through that. And hopefully now you're all in a better headspace. I mean, I'm seeing some comments already in the live YouTube chat that are not so positive. They're talking about hoping for a win or hoping for a loss this week, hoping the Bengals go 6-10. This we'll talk more about it in a little bit, but this start or this 2-game streak, the start to the season, this 2-game streak, this is very, very vintage Marvin Lewis in that this is a type of season that he had early in his career with the Bengals where they maybe didn't start as strong. They kind of got some things going in the middle of the season. Then they made a late push, either missed out at 8-8 on the playoffs or like a season like 2011 where they ended up sneaking into the playoffs due to a bunch of great young players that stepped up big that year and a favorable schedule. But the Bengals have a gigantic game coming up this week, and fortunately and unfortunately, it's on a big-time stage, so we'll talk more about that in a minute. Before we kind of get into all the football stuff, I wanted to start the show off with a little bit of a fun aspect, and we haven't done one of these in a little while. It's a question of the night or question of the program. So if you are not listening live, shame on you. We're on YouTube and CincyJungle.com, so join us every episode that you can. But the question of the night is, and I don't know why, I kind of got nostalgic. Maybe it's because around Thanksgiving and Christmas, you start to watch these movies again, and I'm in my mid-30s. So some of these movies kind of strike me as, some of them are holiday-type movies. So I want to know what your favorite, I guess you would call it an 80s teen comedy or an 80s teen movie. And what I mean by that, they're usually the John Hughes movies, the Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, 16 Candles, The Breakfast Club. I want to hear your favorite John Hughes type movie, I guess. Uncle Buck is another one I think he was involved with, if you like John Candy. So I just been thinking about those movies lately. Usually Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is kind of a Thanksgiving type of movie. And so if you have a favorite movie, let us know in the YouTube chat. Or if you're listening to this program later on, go ahead and shoot us a comment on our YouTube channel, through iTunes, on our SoundCloud channel, on Cincy Jungle in the comment thread where we post this program. What's your favorite John Hughes type of movie? And if you're too young, shame on you. Go watch those movies because they're pretty timeless, pretty hilarious, and I think you would enjoy those movies. Let's kind of talk about, I guess, as I'm going to comb through your comments on the question of the night. So keep them coming. But what I would like to talk about is obviously this 2-game win streak that the Bengals are on. I I don't know what to make of this because part of me thinks, hey, this is a young team that's hitting its stride. A young, we knew this team had a lot of rookies, even though their top rookie in terms of draft selection, it hasn't been playing. He's been a healthy scratch, John Ross, which obviously is a frustration of many Bengals fans. But you saw Joe Mixon have a breakout game last week when he got the lion's share of the carries and the touches. The Bengals kind of did what they needed to do against the Browns in terms of let's just try and control the football, even though they lost the time of possession battle barely by about a minute or so. Let's try and control the football. Let's try and run the football. Let's try and establish that. Lo and behold, the Bengals ran the ball out of shotgun formation quite a bit. Lo and behold, they allowed Joe Mixon to kind of get into a groove with 23 carries and another handful of catches. And what do you know? The kid makes plays. All of a sudden, the offensive line is playing better. And you're inspired by that. Tyler Kroft gets his 5th touchdown catch of the year, having a pretty nice season in relief of Tyler Eifert. Other guys are getting into the action. Tyler Boyd had a couple of nice catches. One was a high effort first down where he dove for the sticks and got it, and the other was, of course, the touchdown. So, not explosive stats, not gigantic plays, but a lot of decent chunk plays that I think a lot of Bengals fans were looking for, and you saw a lot of lanes opened up by the offensive line, particularly against the Browns. You rewind, since we didn't get to cover this game, the Broncos game, wasn't as good up front in terms of offensive line play. The stats were pretty ugly. The Bengals really lost out on terms of total plays, time of possession, all that stuff. Yet they still got after the quarterback, which has been probably their strongest point of the entire season. And I don't want to curse him, but Andy Dalton has not thrown an interception since the first game against the Steelers weeks ago. So all of a sudden, he's not turning the ball over with as much frequency. He has a couple of fumbles lost in that time, but is not throwing the interceptions. He's walked the razor's edge a little bit. We've talked about that on this program, but he's not turning the ball over. The Bengals aren't fumbling the ball away. They're getting after the quarterback, and what do you know? All of a sudden, some of these close games that they lost earlier in the season are now becoming wins. And I guess the question, and I do want to pose it to the live listeners as well, but I guess the question would become, and Michael Myers, I'm already seeing kind of has a thought about it. Are these 2 wins against, teams that are now, I think they're 3-19 combined at this point in time, and the Broncos and the Broncos and the Browns, something to that effect. Is this fool's gold for the Bengals, where we're maybe putting a little bit of stock, and we're getting now a little bit more excitement now that they're 5-6 and not really a sexy record, obviously, at this point in time, but with the weak AFC playoff picture, they are now can be a little bit in control of their own destiny, especially because the 6th seed in front of them is a team they've already beat in the Buffalo Bills, as I mentioned earlier. So I guess this is kind of a weird time for Bengals fans because you want to try and be excited after so many bad things have happened this year, after so many bad losses, bad performances, things like that. It's still not great in terms of the quality of play I think that we're seeing out on the field, because you've seen them lose, like I said, the time of possession battles. They're not forcing turnovers on defense, really. They're getting after the quarterback, and Andy Dalton is keeping the ball safely, but they're not turning the ball. They're not creating turnovers either. So I guess you look at it and you say, okay, is this a team starting to find its groove at an important time of the year? Or is this strictly a product of two bad teams that they're playing right now, and they're playing a brand of football that is only sustainable against teams like the Broncos and the Browns. And that's the question right now, especially as the Bengals now head into this game against the Steelers. And it's obviously a big test. It's a big litmus test to show where this Bengals team is. But it's also a big test to obviously see if they can get into the postseason and see if they can, if they can get into this game. If they can win this game, it would be interesting to see how they finish out the rest of the season, because really they have the Bears, the Lions, the Vikings, and the Ravens. So all of those teams, with the exception of the Bears, currently have a winning record. You would think that the Bengals need to basically go, with one loss the rest of the way to. And pardon me, I'm still battling a cold there. Didn't mean to clear the throat on the air, but still got a little bit of an itchy throat. You have to believe that one loss is about all they can afford, which would put them at best a 9-7 record. And that loss cannot come at the hands of the Steelers or the Ravens if they want to make the playoffs. I would think it would have to be one of those NFC North teams they still have yet to face. But for now, the Bengals are 5-6. They're on a 2-game win streak. Feelings are a little bit better. I'm I'm seeing stuff. Michael Myers, we have the task need earlier in the show by actually before we took the air with Bass Hunter and John McIntosh. So I just think that this game coming up here is a giant test, and it will probably determine what Marvin Lewis's fate will be after this season. Because I think if the Bengals then fall to 5-7, then who knows if the team packs it in. Who knows if we're overrating the team after this 2-win streak that they're on. We'll see what they do. But if you had told me when this team was 0-3 that the Bengals would go 5-3 since and be in the playoff picture at this point in the season, I think we'd all be a little bit surprised. Now, how legitimate of their being in the hunt, quote unquote, is at this point, you can debate that. But I think at this point, most people would be very surprised if they were told that after that 0-3 start with this season, that the Bengals would then go 5-3 in this middle stretch and end up being in the playoff picture. So that's the case right now, and that's what we're dealing with, and that's what we're looking at this point. And I think that it's based on what we saw last year. This team appears to be a better team. How much better, I don't know, but they appear to be a better team and have more talent. Obviously not on the offensive line, but that's another. I think we know the song and dance with that issue. But I think if the Bengals continue to rush the passer well, if they continue to not turn the ball over, especially Andy Dalton not doing those critical poor throws, or one of those throws that bounces off of somebody's hands, and kind of those back-breaking type of plays, I think that this team can continue to ride some of this momentum they've built, and maybe learn to build upon, especially with what you saw with Joe Mixon, learn to build upon how to gain more time of possession, which they've struggled with this year. And in that regard, if they're able to run the ball with Joe Mixon, find a semblance of balance so that they're not so predictable on offense, and get themselves in 3rd and long, 2nd and long situations, which has been another plague of them this year. And I think once you kind of start to get those things coming together, you might see a vastly improved Bengals team, but it still might not happen in 2017. We'll see. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza. I'm hoping to be joined by my usual co-host, Scott Schultze, in just a little bit. We're talking about the Bengals' wins against the Browns and the Broncos. They're on a 2-game win streak. What do you think? Is it fool's gold? Is this simply a product of the Bengals playing 2 poor teams and just getting by? Or are these confidence builders and things that they may have taken quite a bit of learning aspects from and will continue to build the rest of the year and maybe push their way into the playoffs? Like I said, they're in the picture. So we'll see. We'll see how it ends up going. Going forward. We're going to talk about the Steelers game in just a second, and I hate to do this in a live broadcast, but because I've been ill, I need to go grab something for my throat. Otherwise, I'm going to be clearing it all night. So give me 1 second, and I'll be right back. And this is going to be edited out of the later show, but I got to do this. I apologize. Otherwise, you'll be hearing me clear my throat all show, and I don't want to do that. So I will be right back. Okay, I'm back. I apologize. Usually that's probably where a lot of shows would insert a really cool commercial or something like that. I see one of my longtime friends grab an IPA, Micah Lockman. So I don't know if that's in the cards tonight, Micah. I'm under the weather and trying to power through. But at any rate, I apologize for stepping away there. We can cut that out of the later show. Let's move on to the talk about the Steelers game. And before we do, again, I posed a question of the night. I don't know why it sprang to mind, but if you feel like answering it, go for it. It's kind of your favorite 80s teen movie or John Hughes type of movie, whether that's Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Planes, Trains, Automobiles, 16 Candles, Breakfast Club, anything like that. If you've got a favorite, let us know. You can let us know in the live YouTube chat, the live chat at cincyjungle.com, or on any of our platforms where we provide the show, SoundCloud, iTunes, YouTube, all of that. So thank you for tuning in live. Appreciate it. Well, I think we all know the Bengals have a gigantic game this week. We've kind of talked about it already in talking about the other games, but Cincinnati hosts Pittsburgh, second go round of the game of the series this year. I think most people would have thought that the Bengals had a better chance probably to win the game earlier in the season, despite how poorly they had been playing at that point. Just because the Steelers at that point were a little bit in a tailspin. And now, Ben Roethlisberger's found his stride. Antonio Brown has exploded. And they seem to be doing what the Steelers do this time of year, which is get after the passer, play aggressive, and make explosive plays on offense. Now, they did suffer a loss a few weeks ago in Joe Hayden with an injury, and they're dealing with that in a cornerback room that is a little bit beleaguered and known as the weakness of the Steelers team. So, you can kind of take that with however however serious you want to take that. But the Bengals, this is what's tough about this game. Number one, they do not play well at home against the Steelers for whatever reason. They don't play well against the Steelers in general under Marvin Lewis. So let's just kind of throw that disclaimer out there. But they do not play well at home in particular under Marvin Lewis. I think Marvin Lewis has 7 wins total against the Steelers, and I think about 5 of them have been in Pittsburgh. So for some reason, Cincinnati has not played well throughout Marvin Lewis's tenure against the Steelers, especially at home, which is kind of inexplicable. And as you know, with the Steelers fan base, they tend to make any opposition's home field advantage. They say what you want about the fan base, you can say a lot. They really do a good job of taking that away from the home team. I mean, they really take away the home field advantage from the home team. So that's an aspect the Bengals are going to have to deal with, as they always do every year. And then, of course, there's the primetime issue where the Bengals under Marvin Lewis simply do not play well on the primetime stage. I've stood on my soapbox for years about this, and it's been one of my major knocks against Marvin Lewis. And you can sit here and you can say, well, that's when they play the best teams, and that's, sometimes you play those best teams on the road. And the bottom line is, if you're going to be an elite team, you have to win those types of games in these types of venues, whether it's on your home field, whether it's on the opposition's home field, and it's a good team. Because if you can't do it in the regular season, you sure as hell aren't going to do it in the postseason. So these are the types of games that you need to win. And with the Bengals, as I mentioned, at 5-6, facing a division foe that they already lost to once this season, you have to win this game if you are going to make a serious bid for the postseason. And some people I already saw early in the show, they're not going to win, and there's no way they're going to win, and all of that kind of stuff. I don't, obviously history being what it is and everything is not tilting in the Bengals' favor for this, and overall talent, records, all that stuff. The Bengals are and should be an underdog in this game. I guess my question, and obviously it doesn't mathematically they would not be in the playoffs, but I guess my question is, if they win this game, this is to me. I mean, you can look at the Vikings, who are playing very, very good football. The Lions have kind of been up and down, but they're a decent team. You've got the Ravens, who shut out the Bengals in Week 1 this year. That's going to be a tough game. If the Bengals are just to somehow pull this win off against the Steelers, and I don't mean to say somehow as if the Bengals are, an awful team, because like I said, they've gone 5-3 in this middle stretch of the season, and they've kind of turned their season around a little bit. But is it just, hey, if you beat the Steelers, they're going to go on a tear and they're going to get in, they'll be a 9-win, 10-win team. They may win out, whatever, and they're in the playoffs because that's the toughest game, and that's kind of the barometer of kind of showing where this team is at currently? Or is it simply a win, whether it's luck, or maybe they spend so much emotion and so much time preparing for this game that they end up being spent for the rest of the season, and they don't end up playing well? I don't know the answer to that. I don't think anybody definitively does, but I think that obviously if the Bengals were to get to 6-6 with a win against the Steelers, who are, I mean, at this point they're known as a top 2 team in the AFC and maybe a top 3 or 4 team in the entire NFL, I think you would have to argue that the Bengals have a pretty good chance. Then you would be confident that they would end up beating many of the rest of the teams on the schedule. To me, the Ravens are far less scary than the Steelers are. Minnesota is very good, but you know, there's some familiarity there between Mike Zimmer and Marvin Lewis. Who knows how that plays out? Detroit is way too hot and cold for me to really buy into them, and Chicago's a mess. So, you know, I don't know. I think that if they win this game, I think that locker room will be injected with quite a bit of confidence in order to move forward through the rest of the season, end up playing well, and maybe sneaking into the playoffs. There are a couple of other teams that are doing the same thing right now after a poor start, and this one's for Lucas Leonard, who is in the chat room, and not so much for Christopher Todd, who is also in the chat room. But after a poor start, the Chargers are also in the mix with a similar record to the Bengals. They've turned their season around. Who knows what they're going to do the rest of the year, because they also tend to catch fire towards the end of the year. That's seems to be the MO of that team. There are other teams that are, you know, floating out there. Who knows who the Bills are at this point? It's really, I think we can all agree at this point the division is no longer in the hands of the Bengals. I think what they're looking for is a possible wild card. And it's interesting to me to see what some of the comments were already tonight from some Bengals fans that were saying, you know, let's hope for 6-10. And I don't know what you hope for, because I think a week ago, even after the Broncos win, you're kind of going, well, I mean, yeah, they got the Browns next week, should be a win, and, you know, whatever. But you're still disenchanted by Marvin Lewis. This team hasn't showed you enough to be a viable playoff candidate. But all of a sudden now I don't know. There's so many mixed emotions with this team right now. It's hard to say where everybody's at. I will say this. Tyler Boyd, the receiver for the Bengals, was recently interviewed, I believe it was on Wednesday, and obviously talking about the rivalry with Pittsburgh, and it's courtesy of Jeremy Rauch of Fox 19 in Cincinnati. But if you remember, Tyler Boyd he's a Pittsburgh kid, went to University of Pittsburgh, and the Bengals drafted him in the second round of last season. And he says each team is going to play, quote unquote, each team is going to play dirty because of guys getting cheap shotted. Everyone's going to want to get their get backs. So this is really interesting to me. A really interesting comment, because obviously you hear things about Marvin Lewis, you know, preaching professionalism, and yeah, there's some mouthy guys on the Bengals, but nothing like Chad, the era with Chad and Bushman-Zada and Chris Henry. And this is kind of an interesting statement. There's other stuff that we heard earlier this week between Le'Veon Bell and Joe Mixon, and you know, it seems like childish behavior to me. This is going to be a chippy game, a very chippy game, and really, I every time this game comes around, I always say it. It's whoever can out-muscle the other, out-physical the other team, whoever makes the fewest mistakes, obviously, and whoever can keep their cool the most. And unfortunately, those things have not played in the Bengals' corner. I think most, and Michael Myers said it earlier, talking about talent in the YouTube chat. I think most coaches, most teams, all of that recognize the amount of talent the Bengals have on this on their roster. Even though they've lost some guys the past couple of off seasons, they still have talent at a lot of different spots. It's execution, it's discipline, it's things like that that obviously plague this team. And when you play a team like the Steelers, who not only are aggressive, not only play after the whistle, but know how to get in your head in terms of the, talking to you or whatever it is they do, that's something that the Bengals they have to be able to play within themselves, and they can't do the stuff that happened in the wild card game a couple of years ago. They can't have Vontaze Burfict go ballistic. They wanted to play physical. They wanted to play well, but they can't afford penalties against an offense like the Steelers. They can't afford an ejection. They can't afford fights. They can't afford any of that stuff. And I think, we've seen in this rivalry, we've seen that happen. So I think, you want to play with your chip on your shoulder. Yeah, you want to play physical. I don't want to say you want to play dirty, but you got to get yours a little bit because you're going to get it from the Steelers. And that, I thought that was a very interesting comment by Tyler Boyd. Something tells me that the Bengals might sneak out a win this week. Maybe that's just the heart talking because the head's telling me no way. Not that I think they'll get blown out, but it's just a team and a venue, the Steelers, Monday Night Football, that the Bengals can consistently struggle in under Marvin Lewis. And, I'd like to think that they can get past that, but there's too much history playing against them. So I don't know I don't know how we're going to feel Tuesday morning, I guess is what I'm saying at this point. But I think for a variety of reasons, it'll be an entertaining game. And given their record and their 2-game win streak, at least the Bengals have brought back interest in this game by winning a few games and making this kind of a fun AFC North game on Monday Night Football. I'm sure ESPN is thrilled that the Bengals have won a couple of games and made this a more competitive looking contest, at least on paper. And obviously, even if you're a casual NFL fan, you know how crazy this rivalry can get, and what's happened between these two teams over the years, even though the Steelers have dominated in the win-loss column. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza. I thought I'd be joined by my co-host Scott Schultze tonight, but I'm going solo again tonight. Apologize, you've only got my ugly mug to look at, but and my scratchy voice to listen to. Thanks to this cold I'm getting over. But I appreciate you tuning in live. Appreciate you downloading this program. If you are able to tune in live, I know our schedule's been a little wacky over the past few weeks, but usually it's Wednesday nights at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. We're on YouTube on our channel there. We're on cincyjungle.com, so you can check us out there. If you aren't able to join us live, you can check us out. Our content's on Cincy Jungle. We're on iTunes. We're on SoundCloud for audio files. Again, I mentioned our YouTube channel, so check us out there. You can follow us on Twitter at BengalsOBI and get in touch with us via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. We're going to get to some listener questions, and I'm still taking some in the YouTube chat. So if you want some of yours to potentially be answered on air, let me know. I've already got a couple that I've received, so I'm going to go with those. And again, I'm going to try and be positive as possible with what I guess the responses I'm going to give. And K Rhodes, just real quickly, can you believe what's happening in Giants country? No, I cannot. I know there's some folks who are Charger fans who are they might be a little bit pleased with what's going on with Eli Manning, just because, if you remember, Eli Manning back in 2004 snubbed the Chargers to go to the Giants, and they did that Rivers Eli Manning trade. But I mean, even so, Eli Manning seems like a decent guy, comes from a decent family. I know the Mannings can rub people the wrong way a little bit because of their aw shucks demeanor and how much of it is an act and all of that, but I cannot believe that. Not that this is a Giants podcast. I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, but I do think the Giants owed Eli Manning better than that. I think Ben McAdoo is completely lost that team. And if you saw an interview with Eli Manning after essentially he was, from what I understand, he was told he was going to split the game to start, and then they were going to go to Geno Smith in the second half, which is like weird. That's like small college football type of maneuvering and coaching. I don't know if I've ever heard of that in the NFL really, but there was that. And then Eli basically said, look, just let Geno Smith play the whole game. It's, whatever. But in the interview you saw with him, he was pretty broken up, and you could tell, he's done a lot for that team, and, kind of surprising how they're treating him. And I guess if you want to put a Bengals spin on it, at least the Bengals necessarily aren't in that type of situation where they've got like 2 wins on the year, and their longtime quarterback is, it's just a mess. It's just a mess with the Giants, and I don't envy fans of them right now. And when I saw something on Facebook about it, I saw a lot of Giants fans and actually a lot of fans of other NFC East teams that were coming to the defense of Eli Manning, which I thought was pretty interesting. Anyway, got a question from Facebook, and I believe it's from our good friend Chris Berry. And I think Chris left this when we did the Facebook Live after last week's win against the Browns. I could be wrong, but hey, Anthony, I have a question for Bengals OBI. Sorry, I couldn't figure out how to send an email on Twitter. I'm a longtime listener for about 3 years now. Well, that's probably spanning a couple of different shows if it's 3 years now, but that's fine. I know it's probably too early in the season to ask. Do you know of any potential good head coach prospects for next year? Oh, boy. What type of coach would you like to have, offensive-minded or defensive-minded? Would you like to have a player's type of coach, a young coach with little coaching experience? Would you bring back any of our old offensive coordinators, Hugh Jackson, Gruden? I'm asking because it seems like Marvin has lost control of his locker room and does not believe in his play calling and decision making. And by the way, that was for you there, Chris, because I know how much you love those, buddy. I think I don't know. To me, again, if the Bengals are to make a move, I think it needs to be and they need to do something that is so anti what they normally do. And promotion from within is the least type of situation I'd like to see if the Bengals move on from Marvin Lewis after this year. I don't think there's anyone. You heard Boomer Esiason on CBS a couple of weeks ago talk about there's no one on this Bengals coaching staff that seems to be a guy who's that, wow, the next head coach type of guy. I don't think I want anybody. First of all, I think Jay Gruden is probably safe in terms of his job security. Washington's in the mix again, so I think he's not going anywhere. But you look at the coaching tree. And congratulations to Marvin. I mean, he's grown this coaching tree here. Hugh Jackson, Vance Joseph, Jay Gruden. What have Hugh Jackson and Vance Joseph done as head coaches? To me, I don't think you want to bring back old people, or I don't mean old as an age, but recycled coaches that you've had on this team before. I think you got to have a fresh perspective, and that's who Marvin was back in 2003 when they hired him. He was an outside hire. He was a guy who was within the division, came from a Super Bowl winning team in the Baltimore Ravens, built that defense. He did spend a year later in Washington before he took the job in Cincinnati, but I mean, that's who Marvin was when they hired him. He was an outside guy. He was a defensive-minded coach, and he was a guy that brought in certain perspectives and certain ideas that had not been with the Bengals really since Sam Weish was there. So I'm not saying go defensive-minded again. I'm saying they need to get a guy from my preference is someone from within the division. Probably someone from the Steelers staff is you can't beat that team. That team is always the crown jewel of the NFL in terms of success. To me, I think if you find a guy there, I think that there might be someone there that could provide something for you. Todd Haley is one guy there, but a lot of people don't like him because of what happened to him as the Chiefs head coach. Obviously, there's the Patriots guys, offensive side of the ball. Again, you go Josh McDaniels. He's a guy that had some wackiness when he was the head coach of the Broncos years ago. Now he's come back, of course, and under Belichick, he's brought them back to respectability and well, not brought them back to respectability, but he's brought himself back, his reputation back to respectability. I don't know. I there's part of me that wants an established NFL guy who is part of a winning and a currently winning NFL program, whether an assistant coach, something like that. I do think there is merit to dipping into the college ranks. You've seen what Pete Carroll has done since he left and went to Seattle. You saw what Jim Harbaugh built with the 49ers, and he got ran out of town, I thought, somewhat unfairly. Yes, there's the Chip Kellys. Yes, there are other guys out there that, Nick Saban is an example of a guy who has struggled. But if you remember, Pete Carroll kind of had some average years with the Jets and the Patriots. Then he went at USC, built that program up, and now in Seattle's a perennial winner, and he's already got a Super Bowl up there. So, I think you look at Jim Harbaugh. I know that name's not some people love that name. Some people hate it. I really like David Shaw at Stanford. I think he's a really good coach. He's built a strong program there. I don't think Saban, he's now in his mid, I think he's in his mid-60s. He's well entrenched at Alabama. I don't think he's a guy that would leave, and I don't think he's an option really at this point. There are a couple of others that you can look at. I mean, maybe if Ohio State fans really like Urban Meyer, then that makes sense. Just local guy, and he's been very successful everywhere he's been. I think you got to kind of think outside of the box if you're the Bengals. If you're looking to replace Marvin Lewis, I don't. That's not really where they're at right now, because the Bengals are in the mix, and if Marvin Lewis, I'm going to say this, if Marvin Lewis ends up taking this team to the playoffs, and if they win a playoff game, that would be this would be probably one of the most impressive seasons in terms of sticking through it, really getting some quality wins, especially at the end of the season. I would be very impressed with that. But I think whether Marvin Lewis leads this team to the playoffs and they're one and done again, or if they fail to make the playoffs, I think a change is needed, because there are a lot of up-and-coming guys out there that could help this team out. There's another question from Chris about rebuilding. I think that's just too early to talk about right now. I think once this season is officially out of control, we can talk a little bit more about that. But those are some of the names. Obviously, there's some big names in college, some decent names in the pros. I'm not a fan of also the recycling of older head coaches like a John Gruden, who's been out of the game for a long time. There are other coaches out there that just don't make sense to me. But I'd like a younger guy, a fiery guy. You've seen what the Rams did under Sean McVay, their new head coach, and how they're responding, and how he came in, brought a ton of energy, and has kind of forced the hand of ownership, saying, "Hey, you've got this young quarterback you heavily invested in. Let's get him some offensive linemen. Let's get him some weapons. And let's spend the money." And I think if you have a young guy and maybe a guy who has had success within the division, won Super Bowls, and say, "Look, this is the plan. This is exactly what we did here. And this is how we won championships," maybe that person, even right away, might be able to grab Mike Brown's ear, have him open the checkbook a little bit more, especially for outside free agents and things like that. Get a little creative in the draft. That's what I'd like to see. I just like to see. We've seen this team play at conservatives for so long. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. I just like to see this team operate differently. And maybe that's just something that's not going to happen as long as the Brown family is in control. They've done some things differently with Marvin Lewis at the helm, but I just, with a new coach and maybe an entirely new staff, maybe there's a collection of voices that could grab Mike Brown's ears and make a change. But like I said, Steelers game first, other games to finish the year out first. And then we'll figure out, I think, we'll talk a little bit more about head coaching candidates to replace Marvin Lewis as the year goes on. We got another question on Twitter. Again, we're at Bengals OBI, so go ahead and give us a follow there. This question is from Bengals Enthusiast at Bengals_guy. And he's talking about Carl Lawson. And Carl Lawson is having an amazing season for a guy that's basically playing backup reps. He's getting more now that the year is going on, but it seems, I don't know about you guys, but it seems to me that by the way, I like Matthew Lawless. Gus Malzahn is a Bengals type of hire. That's an interesting comment. It seems to me that every time Carl Lawson is on the field, we're hearing his name being called for something mostly positive. Sometimes he gets the encroachment. He tries to time the snap a little bit, and we've seen that. But 7.5 sacks so far as a rookie, leads the team. He's been a Pro Football Focus favorite in terms of pressures and all of that. So I guess, you could sit here and say Carl Lawson should be in the running for Defensive Rookie of the Year this year. He's playing very, very well. Probably won't get the notoriety because of the team he plays for, obviously where he was drafted in the 4th round, that sort of thing. But he definitely deserves to be in that conversation. He's been an outstanding pickup for the Bengals. Bengals Enthusiast just says, basically, is he the best late round gem the Bengals have drafted since Geno Atkins? It kind of depends on how far back you want to go. It kind of depends on what late round, because really Carl Lawson and Geno Atkins are mid round gems. They're not late round gems. They were both 4th round picks. I mean, if you want to say pure value of players taken, you could say Andrew Whitworth in the 2nd round back in 2006. Same draft, Damata Pecco, round 4. 2008, Pat Sims, a guy that was drafted in the 3rd round. Pretty decent defensive tackle. He's had a long career. Obviously, still not the value of Geno Atkins, a guy who's on track for a Hall of Fame career, guy drafted in the 4th round. But it kind of depends on that. But you can also go back even further. TJ Hushmanzada, 7th round pick. Jonathan Fanene, 7th round pick. Guys that played well for this team for a long time that were drafted in these low rounds. It just kind of depends on your perspective of what's a late round, what's a mid round. All in all, I think overall value in terms of career trajectory and what he's done, I still think Geno Atkins is the best value that the Bengals have received. And I don't think anybody really thought he would be, the second or third best interior defensive lineman in the league for essentially his entire career. He's on his way to the Pro Bowl again. He'll be there. I think he's going to be a Hall of Fame player. Obviously, you look at AJ Green, another guy who's paving a way for a Hall of Fame career as well. But he was a number 4 overall pick, so you kind of hope that a pick like that would be, would provide that kind of output. So I think, I guess, if the question is since Geno Atkins, which that is the way it was worded. I mean, I'm hard pressed to find, I guess, someone since, but we're looking at only one season, so the sample size is small. The upside is very big with Carl Lawson, and I did think Jordan Willis would play a little bit better than he's ended up playing this year. He kind of started the preseason really well, started the first couple of games well, and he's kind of really fallen off the map there, but. Carl Lawson has been great this year, and I think the Bengals did a great job in finding some value there. And I think there were a couple of picks that were some of my favorites this year, and that was definitely one of them. I see Chris Berrien going back to his question as well. The Washington Huskies coach, Chris Peterson, that is another good name out there as well. And I think he'd be an interesting hire. He has really made. If you're not familiar with him, he made Boise State a basically a national powerhouse when he was there, and made guys like Kellen Moore a near Heisman Trophy type of player. And now he's got the Washington Huskies consistently competitive. A team that really was not very good for a long time until he got there. So that's a good name there too. Guys, we're going to get out of here. I'm feeling the effects of this cold, and I apologize if it's coming through on the microphone there. I also am flying solo tonight, so I apologize if you got bored of my voice. I'm sorry, but that's kind of the way the dice were rolled tonight. And but I appreciate you guys tuning in. We're going to get out of here. You can check out the show on Cincy Jungle, on SoundCloud, on YouTube, and on iTunes. So subscribe to all of them there. You can also check out our material on Twitter at BengalsOBI and get in touch with the program, the obinsider@gmail.com. We love to hear from you. I think in the next couple of weeks, we'll be having some special guests. I'm hoping to get a couple of folks from Pro Football Focus on the program to talk about the Bengals and the outlook there, as well as maybe some people from opposing SB Nation blogs to come on and talk about the teams that the Bengals are facing going forward. So keep an eye out for that. Appreciate you tuning in live. We will talk to you next week. I guess if you're wanting me to make a score prediction before I get out of here, I will say 23-17 Steelers. I hate to say it, but that's just kind of what I see. But I don't know. Something's telling me something sneaky might happen. We'll see. Let's hope so. And even if the Bengals end up not making the playoffs, it's always good beating the Steelers, especially on primetime. You got to like that. For Scott Schultze, I'm Anthony Cosenza. This has been the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. Thanks for tuning in live, and we'll talk to you next episode.